Please welcome Shayon Sengupta, investment partner at Multicoin Capital.
Good afternoon. My name is Shayon Sengupta. I'm a partner on the investment team at Multicoin. A lot of our discussion today has focused on foundational leaps in market structure and regulation that will enable hundreds of millions of people to onboard to internet capital markets. I want to use my time here today to tell you about an evolving set of coordination primitives that we're seeing sit on top of internet capital markets that I call internet labor markets. But we'll start with a very basic question. How does someone get their first private key? So the first option is to buy, which is to opt out of the incumbent financial system and to explicitly swap fiat or traditional assets into crypto assets. And the second option is to earn over crypto rails. I'm sure many of you have seen stories of companies like Scale AI and SpaceX using stablecoins to pay contractors out. And while earning in stables is absolutely the direction the world is headed in universally, there is an even larger cohort of highly active, highly engaged contributors to different protocols and networks that have earned non-USD denominated assets, that is, the native tokens of those protocols and networks. And I think that the latter represents an early indication of the inevitable future in which people across the world will complete bespoke actions in service of some goal and receive their earnings in the native tokens of the protocols and networks that they serve. So in legacy finance, the checking account is the entry point into participation in the financial system. Usually credit and brokerage, they follow from that. And so I'm going to spend the next few minutes going over my first claim, which is that people will think of their balances, their savings in crypto assets, because those are the rails on which they're going to get paid. And that will translate into participation in internet capital markets. And this shouldn't be a surprise because crypto's earliest roots are in contributor-led work. The first proof of this was Bitcoin. It specified one action, hashing, and it allowed anyone, anywhere to burn energy, and it allowed contributors to receive the native asset in reward. And so the result of that work was the single shared ledger that today is used by publicly traded ETF funds and sovereign wealth funds to move those balances around. And the next concrete instantiation of that idea, as applied to broader domains, was Helium Network, much of the design of which was the result of a close partnership between us at Multicoin and what is now the Nova Labs team. And that gave way to an increasing cohort of networks that we labeled in 2021 as proof of physical work. And that's canonically come to be known as DeepIn today. And so if you've done your homework, you'll know that these are the networks that invert the cost structure of CapEx-heavy infrastructure buildouts. So they'll aggregate resources like compute and energy and data at the edges, and they'll use their native tokens to transfer the cold start risk of those networks taking off. And where we're seeing this going is a further increase in the complexity surface of the work. So not just running a miner or installing a piece of hardware at a nearby coffee shop, but solving a complex engineering problem or running out an ad campaign. The next step in this lineage is proof of arbitrary work. And so we expect these workloads to become increasingly bespoke and for the contributors to be compensated with very precise payouts for a variety of unique tasks that are only possible to achieve via a permissionless global network. And so then the natural question is, what does this work look like? I think it's worth stepping back for a moment to assess how the nature of work has changed across different cycles of technology. The universal pattern is that technology atomizes work. It unbundles what would be a single function run by a single individual throughout their life into multiple sub-roles that are completed by many sets of distinct contributors. And to illustrate this, there's no better question to ask than, how did you get here this morning? And so 20 years ago, to get from point A to point B in New York City, you'd have hailed a cab. And that cab driver would have been full stack. He would have purchased a medallion. He would have handled maintenance of the vehicle, accepted payments in cash, bookkeeping, planning routes, navigation. All of these functions were the responsibility of one individual. And then 10 years ago, Uber came along, and it unbundled that work into its components. So the driver is still in the mix, but the core functions of matching drivers and riders, recommending routes, handling navigation, payments, these are all handled by some combination of Uber, the company, and third-party vendors to Uber, like Mapbox or Stripe. And I think we know where this is going. The driver is going to go away. And so if you consider the product offering of something like the Tesla robotaxi, the functions of that driver are now replaced by an extremely complex web of hardware and software that requires the contributions of people all around the world. And so this means sourcing training data for vision models. This means remote teleoperation, so having someone in another part of the world take control of the vehicle when it runs into an edge case. Very precise positioning and localization, fleet operations, charging. These self-driving companies, they become increasingly reliant on third parties in the market to fulfill some of these functions for them. There's far too many components here for one organization to source the pieces alone. It turns out that many of these third parties are already in the Multicoin portfolio. So HiveMapper has fleets of truck drivers running around collecting mission-critical mapping data that goes into the models. Fuse is in the early stages of building out an EV charger aggregation network. Braintrust is helping large orgs make hires at scale around data labeling. And so the point I want to drive home here is that no matter how large or well-resourced the organization at the center of this mess is, it will always be more capital efficient and time efficient to distribute out some of these functions to internet scale vendors, specifically internet labor markets. And so I think at this point I have everything I need in order to define the category. Internet labor markets, or ILMs, are contributor-owned marketplaces in which the inventory is an arbitrary unit of work that is priced and settled in native tokens and verified via cryptographic and cryptoeconomic mechanisms. I will go through this in a few minutes. But prior to that, I want to lay out my second claim to guide this talk, which is that ILMs are uniquely positioned to solve problems that conventional org structures cannot solve. And so to be a little more concrete about that, for something to be an ILM, it has to go after a problem that has a few specific attributes. That problem needs to require distributed contributors at scale that are performing a set of bespoke actions at a very high degree of quality. And implicit in solving a problem with those attributes, you would necessarily need to source a massive number of participants, fund each and every one of their contributions, and then verify that the work was done correctly, not just once, but on an ongoing basis. And so I'm going to demonstrate over the next few slides the two major ways crypto primitives structurally enable each of these solutions in ways that centralized orgs or traditional outsourcing functions simply cannot. And so the first is through newly issued native tokens. We know that tokens are a magical instrument for risk transfer that helps cold start massive contributor bases. We've learned that through DeepN. And so this is especially helpful for actions that require so much scale, are so bespoke, and necessitate such frequent payouts that a centralized org of any size couldn't possibly fund it in dollars or source the right people. And so examples of this could be getting continuous biomarker readings for patients with rare diseases so that we can run novel clinical trials, or capturing the voice recordings of thousands of sales calls across organizations to train AI agents that will eventually automate some of those functions. What native tokens do is they lower the barrier for entry. They lower the user acquisition cost associated with sourcing contributors, and that is what allows you to solve these unique or bespoke problems. The operative phrase here is scale. Scale is the thing that these networks are the best at. And so we'll go over the other two components here, which are bespokeness and the frequency of payouts. It's helpful to look along these axes, bespokeness on the vertical and frequency of payouts on the horizontal. ILMs are really going to skew towards the top right of this quadrant. The bottom right is going to start looking like traditional DeepNs. And so to illustrate, let's consider an example. So consider Shaga. Shaga is an ILM that aggregates video game data, so specifically player keystrokes and gameplay video. And they take that data and they package it for sale to AI labs. And these labs care about how large sets of humans are exploring and cooperating and failing in these structured game environments because they're trying to model out these complex 3D physical spaces. And so from the perspective of the gamer, the ability to download a piece of software, finish playing a game, and then see a balance of tokens hit their wallet immediately, and then continue playing, provides a really powerful engagement and attention driver on a psychological basis. But more than that, it inherently creates the conditions necessary for virality, because players often play with friends and will earn referral bonuses for doing so. This continuous stream of token payouts across hundreds of thousands of players is really not tenable without crypto rails. And acquiring all the users to converge on that specific software client as a standard would be impossible without a new token for them to earn and then rally behind. And so you'll see here that this construction is solving for scale, bespokeness of workload, and frequency of payments. And so we'll do another example. Consider CrunchDAO. Crunch is a company that we led a seed round in about 18 months ago. They're an ILM built on the thesis that talent is ubiquitous, but opportunity is not. And so what Crunch does is it enables any organization to specify a data set and then an objective function around that data set. And then it runs competitions where machine learning engineers from anywhere in the world can compete to build the most predictive model. And so the impact of this is effectively creating a free market clearing price for any number of data science problems. And so today, Crunch will leverage a global permissionless network of 12,000 machine learning engineers, many of whom are anonymous, solving problems for everyone from early-stage biotech startups to sovereign wealth funds and their trading arms. And it then pays out those machine learning engineers deterministically in new native tokens as soon as the winning model is decided. And so this is especially important for early-stage teams because they might have otherwise spent a huge amount of their runway in cash on hiring a full-time data scientist, but they can get an equivalent or better insight through the market at a fraction of the cost and denominated in tokens. Conversely, the ML engineer that solves the problem has now earned a token in something that they've made that much more valuable through their contributions. And so hopefully that was illustrative. We'll move on to the next major reason crypto rails uniquely enable ILMs, which is something we learned over and over designing deepins over the past few years, which is that permissionless systems that offer rewards are a honeypot for fraud, that is, spoofing contributions to earn tokens. It turns out that proving that a piece of work was done correctly requires a mix of both cryptographic and crypto-economic mechanisms. Otherwise, you bleed out to contributors who aren't doing what they say they're doing. So again, a helpful way to look at this is on this quadrant. We generally segment workloads by whether they're physical or virtual. And we've seen approaches to verify the quality of the work via either cryptographic or crypto-economic approaches. I'll go over what that means in a second. So consider the top half of this quadrant. Take WorldCoin. WorldCoin was a Multicoin 2021 investment. WorldCoin is going after the increasingly important problem of proof of personhood. So verifying that any human is, in fact, a human. And they do this through a biometric scan of retinas via a device that they have built they call the orb. I'm sure many of you have seen these. And so they have a network of orb operators that are scanning these retinas. And those orb operators are beneficiaries of bleeding-edge cryptography at the device level. And so the proof of the verification is happening at the time of the scan. And both the operator and the recipient of the scan are receiving tokens for that proof. And so in a similar vein, we've seen a verification primitive called zkTLS grow increasingly popular among founders. zkTLS uses cryptography to prove the contents of any arbitrary piece of information on any web page. And so in the case of a crypto-enabled influencer marketplace like Daisy, which gives content creators tokens for promoting specific posts, Daisy can prove that the poster actually received the impressions they claimed to, instead of submitting a modified screenshot, which is a common failure mode that occurs across traditional influencer marketplaces. And so look, cryptography is great. It's the reason why we're all here. But some workloads need human review, and there is a cost associated with that review. And so usually the contributor in these cases has to put up some economic stake of their own that can be slashed when some committee of evaluators decides that the contribution was fraudulent. And so this is the crypto-economic solution to verification. We've seen teams like Glow, which incentivizes the build-out of utility-scale solar facilities, or Brain Trust, which is connecting enterprise orgs to contractors employing this type of verification method. Now, look, I know there's a lot of names here. The right way to go through these is by illustrating how entire categories of work are unbundling and where ILMs are going to sit in that process. And so we'll start with marketing. And so 20 years ago, we had people called advertisers who would think up copy and images, and then they would buy reach through TV and print. And then the internet enabled a much wider scale of distribution and much stronger verification through primitives like event tracking and attribution. And the role of that single advertiser split into many different roles. So you have programmatic ad buyers, you have content creators, you have affiliate program managers. There's tons of more roles that came into existence. And today, crypto has made those roles increasingly granular, and it's provided much stronger scale and verification. So for example, consider Clipstake. Clipstake is a marketplace for brands to post long-form media, which is then clipped into these 30-second snippets and then shared by these thousands of accounts across socials. So Clipstake uses zkTLS to verify views and discount bots, and then it pays out the accounts that share those clips on a CPM basis in new native tokens. In a similar vein, Cato scrapes social channels for mentions of a specific brand or company, and then it retroactively rewards content creators who can attain organic reach or attention around that topic with new native tokens. So in each of these examples, there is a scale cohort of contributors, and granular payouts for atomic bespoke actions. We'll do another example. It's worth spending some time on something that's deeply physical, so energy. 20 years ago, state-run utilities effectively owned the entire energy supply chain. Consumers didn't really have any choice as to their pricing or their mix of power. And then there were advancements in photovoltaics and deregulation, and energy capacity has effectively moved closer and closer to the edge now. And so you have a ton of new roles around that. You have rooftop and community solar initiatives. You have hardware installers. You have retail energy providers that are privately held. And the natural evolution of this is very fine-tuned incentives for energy generation, consumption, and storage at the household level. And so a strong example of this is Fuse, which is a company Multicoin invested in last year. Fuse is using tokens to incentivize consumers to build capacity or reduce consumption at peak load hours, that is, when demand for power outstrips supply in a given area. And so in practice, this means receiving a notification at such an hour and then being paid tokens for reducing consumption on a per kilowatt hour basis. So you would turn off a dryer or a heat unit. But Fuse also incentivizes the setup of solar panels or batteries or other distributed energy resources, and it rewards you for dynamically shifting your power use to those sources at those load hours. And the way Fuse monetizes each of these individual actions is by running wholesale power trading operations in those areas. So the actions of the contributors are uniquely enabling Fuse to price power more effectively at those times, and then Fuse will return the proceeds of that operation back to contributors through token payouts for, again, granular bespoke actions. And so the recurring theme across these examples is that the shape of work is changing now faster than it ever has. We are right in the middle of AI systems, reorchestrating how every single industry operates. And the conventional view around this is that we're going to head into a labor crisis and that automation is going to replace jobs. I take the exact opposite view. I think we're going to have substantially more jobs that are just going to look very different. And that brings me to my last claim, which is that AI is going to massively accelerate internet labor markets, and these structures are going to be a part of solving increasingly harder problems across domains like healthcare, consumer robotics, customer service, media generation. Each of these industries is going to get unbundled into subfunctions, and ILMs will uniquely provide inputs into those systems. In the limit, we expect contributing to these types of markets to become full-time work for individuals, as opposed to the augmentative income that it serves today. And the incentive structures and verification primitives will continue to improve, and that will allow founders to go after increasingly ambitious problems. And so what I'll leave you with is that internet capital markets are only as large as the set of participants that opt into them. And we see internet-native organizations driving the adoption of the private key as the salary account. And I think that's what's going to drive participation in the fully open, permissionless systems of commerce that we're building. That's all I have for you today. Thank you very much for your time.